Hello, welcome to Recall Gaming Exploits, and we have another brand news for you. So Capcom, they're dying, and I've been saying it on my Twitter and Facebook for ages that they're dying. If you follow those, you would have seen it. But the time is now. They've removed their defences. Now anyone can go along and just buy a piece of Capcom. You can buy it for like, it's something like $17.50. You can buy a share in Capcom right now. That's about £15 UK. I mean, it's a massive approximation off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that one. But it's roughly around that much. So you can buy a piece of Capcom, and what this actually means is that if someone buys enough shares in Capcom, they'll own it. If you buy 50% of Capcom today, you will own Capcom. Of course, you can't do that unless you're a multi-millionaire, but the price that it's going for, most AAA games get developed for more than this. You can develop a AAA game for more than you can buy the entirety of Capcom. That would be all of the IPs. You'd own Resident Evil, you would own Street Fighter, you would own Mega Man, all the rest of it. That's it, and then you could sell those on to other companies or keep them yourself and then develop those games yourself and release them onto the world. This is the thing though, that means that anyone can buy them. So most likely a big company, a big publisher is going to come along, and either all of the big companies or the big publishers are going to just start buying up the IPs one by one, tearing it to pieces, like we saw with THQ, where you had a few companies buy a couple of IPs here and there. Or a company could come in, for instance Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft or EA or Ubisoft could just buy the entirety of Capcom. They could just swallow the whole thing, and then all of a sudden you'd have Ubisoft Resident Evil or Microsoft Resident Evil coming out, which means that there could be some, if say the top 3 hardware developers, the Nintendo, Sony or Microsoft, come along and just buy mass amounts of IPs or the entirety of Capcom right now, or they become the majority shareholder, that means that they'd own the company, which means that there would be exclusive games coming out on those consoles, and it would be the entirety of Capcom's back catalogue. So it's a very interesting time for gaming, and I think it's a long time coming, and I think it's needed. The fact is, this is the reason why Capcom died. It's as simple as this. You got to think about this not as a games company. You got to think about this as a business, because it's all about the profitability of the product. It's like any other business. So if we go back in time, we can see why Capcom has failed so hard. Capcom's sitting there, they've transferred into the new 360 era, they've recently just had a massive success in the PS2 era and PS1, coming back from their failures towards the end of the 90s, where they'd released about a bajillion Street Fighter games that no one was buying and lost all their money. Does it sound familiar already? I know. It's just ridiculous how people repeat the same mistakes, but there's a little bit more to it than that. So, they came out of that success, and the problem was their main franchises now were hitting their 5s and 6s, and those kind of numbers, like the Resident Evil 5. And when that happens, you can see it in films. Any horror film you watch, mainly horror and B-movies, you look at Nightmare on Elm Street, or Halloween, or Friday 13th, and you see them going past the 3 and going to the 4s and the 5s and the 6s, and it goes all the way up. And Hellraiser's a perfect example. And you see that number just keep going up, and the quality of the films keep dropping, because the storylines start getting written by different people, because the original writers can't be fucked with it anymore and want to work on a different project. They've lost interest in their own work, so they want to do something new. So the company, not wanting to kill off their flagship franchises, then goes out and gets a fucking secondary writer to come in, some other guy. And then this happens once or twice. They'll get different writers in, because if that game doesn't succeed, they'll get a new writer in, and possibly a new dev team entirely. And the storylines just get so convoluted, so mixed up, and plot holes just become bigger and bigger, and people lose interest. It's as simple as that. So that's what's happened. Their main franchises became convoluted pieces of shit, because they'd been done to death. I mean, you can get away with this for stuff like Call of Duty because of the multiplayer, and I think that they tried to westernise a lot of their games, like Resident Evil and various others, except from Street Fighter. That still stayed Street Fighter, shockingly, in all the worst ways as well. But I'm not saying it's a bad game. It is a good game. I'll get back to that in a second. Games like Resident Evil did not need westernisation. They just needed that horror aspect there. They needed the survival. It needs all that. The formula was not what was wrong. The formula was not dying. Survival horror is still a great genre. And I'm not talking the Slender Man style survival horror. That's not survival horror, that's just YouTube bait. It really is. You did not need to change formula, you just needed to reimagine it. Give Resident Evil a break, make a conclusive ending to the series, and then maybe reboot it later in about a decade or two, when people's interest would be sparked by the original creators coming back to make another game. The problem was when they tried to westernise the game, the series as a whole, with Resident Evil 5 and the games following that, in various... I mean, I'm mainly talking about Resident Evil because it's the main Capcom game that I know, by the way. But it has happened to other ones. I have heard stories, but the names are escaping me right now as I speak. But the problem with westernising all their games was they was alienating not only their Eastern fans, but their Western fans as well. The Japanese fans don't like games like Call of Duty for the most part, and Western fans have a more refined version of the action game. We do. We have plenty. Resident Evil is not a good action game. It's an okay action game with really good graphics, but that's it. To me, it looks kind of goofy when you play it as an action game. I'll be honest. So essentially, they looked at what was happening in the West, because all of a sudden in the West you had big games like Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, and a few others coming out and blowing everyone away, making huge amounts of profits never thought possible in the video game industry. And Capcom wanted a slice. That's all well and good, but in doing so they alienated all their fans and ruined their own game series, every single one of them. And then on top of that, they had a surprise up their sleeves in the form of Street Fighter, which was a success. It didn't explode into the mass fanaticism that happened in the early 90s, no, but it was a success. It worked. So what did they do? They made about 8 fucking versions of the game. I am aware I might have exaggerated with the number, but they made multiple versions of the game, and they didn't stop at that. It was, here, you can pay £20 odd or £25 to download it if you've already got to a certain version of the game. Because some of the versions you couldn't do it with, it's convoluted as fuck. Or you could go out and buy another boxed copy. They were shipping out boxed copies for what was essentially DLC. If you get Street Fighter 4 and then Street Fighter Arcade Edition, I know people will go, oh my god, they're so different. There are a lot of people that will do that. But essentially all that's happened is they've added a fuck ton of characters, but they have added quite a few of them, and they've made what I would call a patch. A number of patches that have fixed certain elements in the game and tweaked and refined the game to make it perfect, which is essential for a beat 'em up game that's going to be used in tournaments so much. But they decided to release these not only as DLC but as boxed releases. It costs money to make boxes, CDs, instruction manuals for the same game multiple times over. It made no sense. They could have just done it here. Here is Character Pack 1. Here is Character Pack 2. Here is Character Pack 3. And so on and so forth. And they also put a lot of DLC content on the disc itself, and then waited for people to pay for it. Now, the reason originally for this was, oh, well, you needed something on the disc because balancing so that people could then play online against people that have bought the pack, and people that haven't could still play it because the pack data is already on the disc. So, essentially, keep the data on the disc, then they can play with people who then decide to go buy the pack, buy the character pack. But if you don't buy the character pack, you won't have characters, but you better play against them. Okay. Except you've released so many bloody characters now, and a lot of those characters weren't on the disc and become available later as downloads. Holy fucking shit! Oh, it's just fucking convoluted as fuck. It really blows the mind what they did with Street Fighter. It really blows the mind what they did with Resident Evil. It really blows my mind that every single person was screaming at them, just make a survival horror game, and just make a Mega Man game, and just make this game again. All these games that we love, but no, they didn't. Did they? No. They spunked their money up the wall by developing Dead Rising fucking 3. I know it has a following, but really, I'm bored. Bored of Dead Rising now, and 3 looks like the most boring one out of lot of them. The fact is, when a company ignores its fans, its customers, the people that give it money for their products, then you don't sell. And when you don't sell, you don't make profit. And when you don't make profit, you get liquidated and sold off to other companies. And that's what's happening. And it's just Capcom's own fault. I've been saying it for fucking ages, and now it's happening. But it could be a good thing, because then Capcom titles and IPs and all the rest of it and all their games can go to companies that might actually do a good job, might actually listen to the fans of the series. I mean, think about it. Any company, forget company names, but any company that buys Resident Evil right now, what do I think they're going to do? I think they're going to go, what do the fans want? They want Resident Evil. What do you mean they want Resident Evil? They want a survival horror Resident Evil. Okay, well, let's do that then. Let's try and do that. Right, we'll send it to our best horror guys, and they'll try and make a Resident Evil game. Okay. And they'll go off and make a play survival horror Resident Evil. That will most likely be a reboot. Let's face it. And it'll probably blow the fans away. And then you have Resident Evil back. Yeah, of course it's rebooting under a different company. Possibly with the Capcom name still attached, depending on whether they bought the whole bloody company as a whole. But we'll have Resident Evil and many other games back that, to be honest, either A, haven't had a game in fucking decades, or B, have been completely shat on recently. So, though the original creators of the games might not be involved, it might not be that bad of a fucking thing. Anyway, thank you for watching Recall Gaming Exploits. That's all from me. I can rant on for days about this. Do that stuff that every other channel tells you to do, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.